but kind of an interesting shift we're going to make now from biotech to psychedelic industry. So we have three people. We have them here, right? Yes. Here, right? So William Rosellini is the president of a company that therapeutic company, a clinical stage biotech company that directs its efforts towards fighting cancer. I can't quite pronounce the name of your company, but you're going to do it when you're up here, right? Chris McElvany, did I say your right name right? Close enough, right? I'm in the ballpark. Is the president and CEO of Lucy Scientific Discovery, one of the largest psychedelic drug production facilities, which manufactures various drugs from the use of psychedelic treatment therapies, including LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, mescaline. He's the one who sponsored the mushrooms who are on your dinner plate, on your lunch plate. I know you're all wondering, hey, I don't really know. Right? Enrique Alonso is an active venture capital investor and the founder of General Partners of Ocama Partners, a private investment vehicle seeking advancements in mental health science and technology. With that, let's give these guys a round of applause and invite them up.
So thanks for having me moderate this panel as best I can. Wanted to start with a conversation with these guys to explore a topic that's very interesting to me as a neuroscientist. So I wanted to start with why you guys got into mental health and psychedelics as a profession, what your reason to be in the industry is. Maybe Enrique, you start.
Good. Well, for me, it was a very personal journey, if you call it that way. You had family issues with mental health, addiction issues in my family, some which led to tragedy. And then I had a profound experience myself with psychedelic assisted therapy that led me to believe this could really help a lot of people. And I wanted to find ways to help other people heal. It started with philanthropic donations to an organization called MAPS. Hello? And then that led to a few angel investments. I'm a kind of sector agnostic angel investor before I got into space. And then quickly realized that, hey, there's other family offices that are interested in the space because of their own family journeys through mental health, addiction, and other things. And we really require a team with deep scientific experience and some analysts so we can make smart investments, because there's a lot of companies in the space. And even though different from other biotech, here you have, human experience, many generations, including starting with indigenous cultures of people using these medicines and benefiting from them. But it hasn't really it hasn't gone to the next level, right? So yeah, that's how I came to it.
Great. Chris, how about you? Why'd you get into this?
So psychedelics actually have been a big part of my life since high school. Actually, by happenstance, someone handed me a tiny piece of paper. Right, change your mind. That it's LSD, and I recalled back to health class and thought, well, that's a drug, right? And he said, yeah, kind of, not really, but I ate it kind of on a dare, and I would say that from that on, I had a kind of a different perspective, certainly on drug use and mental health. It's something that has really kind of guided me along the way. Led me to the cannabis space about, a few decades ago now. And I was fortunate to have a pretty substantial exit from my cannabis companies that I founded years ago, and moved to Puerto Rico and met one of my neighbors that had made an investment in a psychedelics company. in Canada, and after about 6 months of arm wrestling, he convinced me to kind of take over as CEO. But I would say overall, it's something that has really been my north star.
Great, thank you. Chris's company is in a quiet period, so we're not going to be able to talk too much about Lucy Scientific. But if you would, tell us about kind of what's happened over the last 3 to 5 years in the field of psychedelics, and then what you think might be happening over the next 5 years.
I think in the last 3 to 5 years, we've seen a substantial interest, or it's kind of been under the lens, so to speak, from media. Haven't seen it already or read the book, Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. That certainly raised some attention to it. But the research has been going on for really, I guess, the last couple of decades, and had a resurgence mostly in the last few years. But the science is nothing new. It's been around and partially or mostly understood since the 40s and 50s, before the compounds were prohibited. But in general, I think some of the recent media attention and some of the research studies certainly that have come out have really stimulated this.
Yeah, look, I mean, first of all, 5 years ago, there was no funding for the space, right? There was some research being done, primarily through philanthropic donations. And that quickly changed, some 2 to 3 years ago. You started seeing, serious, mostly high net worth money coming to the space because of people's personal experiences or whatnot. And, now you actually have about 400 companies in the industry, and you actually have billions of dollars in investment, and, things are not the same as before. But you do have, a serious situation where companies are starting to run out of money in some ways, and there's only a few winners that may emerge from this thing, similar to other biotech. Yeah.
What are some of the investment themes that you're seeing kind of develop in the industry? Not just a drug from psilocybin. What are some of the other themes that you're seeing over and over?
Yeah, so right now one of the big themes is whether you can take analogs of the classic psychedelics, the classic psychedelic being psilocybin, MDMA, LSD, and create analogs which strip out the psychedelic effect but still retain some of the efficacy, because of the neuroplasticity that happens where your brain rewires when you take a psychedelic. And there's people on both sides of the spectrum here, but you're seeing a lot of the capital from traditional biotech and some interest now from pharma in that side, because then you can, in essence, create the magic pill where, you take your pill and you'll feel better. On the other side of that, there's people who believe that you need the journey because you have to go back and potentially relive your trauma, so that you can actually get better. And the leading organization that and through clinical trials right now called MAPS, which is taking MDMA through PTSD, falls under that category of, hey, you got to go in a room with 6 hours on a journey, with 2 therapists, in order to cure your trauma. And the results are actually remarkable. And they've gotten fast track treatment through the FDA, in large part because, there's 25 to 30 veterans killing themselves every day. And I think that's on the low end because, suicide rates actually are much higher when you factor in people who, drive into a tree and collect insurance, unfortunately. So anyhow, yeah, MDMA is probably going to be the first treatment approved. We all hope. The question is, how do you commercialize that? And that's still, an open question for both pharma and investors.
Interesting. Chris, you've been in both cannabis and now psychedelics. Kind of do a compare and contrast on what you saw that's the same and what you see that's different in the psychedelic space.
I think we're seeing the space really kind of develop faster for psychedelics than it did for cannabis, in my opinion. There seems to be more evidence of medical or of efficacy behind psychedelics than certainly has been proven or indicated across the board for cannabis so far. So I would say overall the medical and research community seems to be embraced to a greater extent than they have with cannabis so far. One of the things that we're cautious of, and actually watching even some of the polling or the election last night, there are certain states, Colorado, which is kind of my home state, is actually, we'll find out this afternoon if they pass a bill that ultimately decriminalizes natural psychedelics at the state level. So one of the things that we're watching is as these state by state or kind of fragmented regulations unfold, we certainly don't want to be in the same situation with or as the cannabis markets have been, where there's still a great deal of confusion between the state and federal. I would say overall there are similarities. We're talking about many of the same or the same kind of consumer base on if the compounds were to ever go recreational. But in general, what we're talking about here is something that is certainly, in my opinion, more of a drug or a medicine than cannabis is. And I hate to say that, having spent the last 20 years in the cannabis space.
I have my fair share of triumphs and bruises from the cannabis industry. I was the first investor in a company called Kronos that ended up being worth $10 billion at one point, and then also have some bad investments in cannabis as well as probably a lot of people. Look, I think there's certainly similarities. And look, there's a company called GW Pharma, which is one of our benchmarks, which got a drug approved through the FDA for pediatric epilepsy. And eventually was sold, I think, to Jazz Pharmaceuticals for $7 billion or so. And that's kind of one of the models that we'd like to see happen in psychedelics. The recreational side, honestly, I don't think is investable. There are states and cities decriminalizing psychedelics, and I think that could be good. At the same time, I'm very cautious because we had I guess prior to my generation, but there was a whole time when Timothy Leary came out and said tune in, drop out, and the wrong people in the wrong setting were doing these very powerful medicines, and it kind of went the wrong way, and everybody freaked out, and research got shut down for many years. So that's what kind of concerns me about the recreational side, and so we're focusing exclusively on medical.
And so kind of in line with that, what do you think the regulators need to do different, or what has to happen in the future to make sure that the industry becomes a medicine, a first-in-class medicine?
I'm certainly not one to, argue for more regulations, but what we're talking about here and the power of these compounds, it really does deserve, some greater level of regulation than a state, perhaps like Colorado or Oregon, are going to look at. And to Enrique's point, my biggest fear, well, first of all, is that someone is harmed or harms another under the influence, and the news of that, could set the industry back on its heels, like we saw because of some of the movement in the 60s, like Timothy Leary's.
Is that, repeat the question?
Just what could regulators do to make an easy adoption?
Honestly, I think it's more similar to other biotech, where it's really about getting things through the process, the FDA process. It's more FDA related. I do think it doesn't make any sense that psilocybin is a Schedule 1 drug like heroin is. That makes no sense. Cocaine's a Schedule 2, so DEA, descheduling or rescheduling some of these compounds makes sense, but it's more going to be driven by what happens through clinical trials and speeding that along, because and by the way, so far both psilocybin and MDMA have been fast tracked because of the mental health crisis we're under.
And so on a Schedule 1 or Schedule 2 drug, could you walk me through how patenting works and how people are able to go through that process, because it's different than it would be for an ordinary biotech? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Look, it's not any different than any other pharma or biotech process, right? It's really the same process. One of the issues here is that you have something called prior art, because these compounds have been used for generations. And in fact, I think LSD was first patented by Sandoz or Merck, and psilocybin was as well. MDMA was as well. So I think there's a lot of complexity around patents, but it's not any different than any other biotech.
Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed, and we have a handful of provisionals in play right now, and a great patent attorney that knows how to navigate this space. But in general, what I've seen with some of the other intellectual property and patents that have been filed so far is that many times the examiner or patent agent doesn't understand the complexities of the space or the history, and certainly doesn't know what set and setting is, for instance, or like Compass, for instance, just recently patented the idea that administering a psychedelic in a certain comfortable setting is their invention, and clearly an examiner that had been around the space at all would have kicked that out initially, but we're not seeing a whole lot of that happen just because of the lack of knowledge, I would say.
So when you look out over the next 3 to 5 years, could you give kind of a projection on approvals, number of studies, kind of what's the future of the space going to look like in terms of products that you could go out and either be in a clinical study or go out and actually purchase?
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic that some of the compounds will start getting approved. I think even the U.S. government has said that they expect psychedelics to start being approved in 2024. And it'll probably start with MDMA because they're in phase 3 and getting good efficacy results. So I think they'll start getting approved for indications like depression, some addiction. There's a lot of good work being done there, anxiety, and then eventually it could move into other things too. I mean, it's pretty remarkable that the number of things that are being shown to work here, and the world needs it.
What's your projection outside of MDMA and psilocybin? Are there other applications that you're interested in seeing, or what's on the forefront of that R&D?
Yeah, I mean, you even see, stuff for diabetes. Like, we're looking at something right now, some research for diabetes, and it's all, all kinds of indications outside of the traditional ones. And there's also people working on novel compounds that are analogous to these classic psychedelics that, again, do it differently, take out some of the side effects. One really interesting thing is, with the opioid epidemic, there's a African root called ibogaine, which has been one of the only things shown that can work on opioid addicts to remove withdrawal symptoms, and it has remarkable efficacy, but it also comes with side effects, such as heart issues, which FDA would never approve. So if you can create an analog that actually strips out some of that that issue, you could have a really breakthrough thing that could help millions of people.
I think clearly we're talking about psychedelics here, but what we're experiencing or seeing today is kind of a broader movement towards harm reduction. And in some cases, like Canada, for instance, they have what they refer to as safer supply. So a manufacturer like us, being based in Canada, is watching certainly the psychedelic space and looking at our capabilities and capacities there. But as the government is looking for ways to cut off the supply of fentanyl and some of the harms that are associated, not just acute or individual harm, but societal harms around the criminalization of drugs, i.e., where cartels and corrupt and basically black market supply influences. We're expecting to see a major movement there, and I think that's a great opportunity. It's certainly outside of the space of psychedelics, but I guess in tone with the conversation.
And sort of speaking of that, there's a focus in the U.S., but can you talk to me generally about international approach to the psychedelic industry? What's happening in other areas?
International?
Internationally, how does it work outside of the U.S., for example?
I comment a little bit on that. There's companies actually in Europe doing really interesting work. Switzerland, because it has a history for pharmaceutical, pharma is there, and they've done a lot of clinical research there. Actually, I can get you into human trials a lot quicker than you can in the U.S. For example, we're doing due diligence in a company now that's working on a synthetic version of ayahuasca, which is a combination of DMT and harmine, and they're already doing it in humans and have shown past phase 1 in humans, whereas that would take a lot longer to do in the U.S. And there's also one of the best capitalized companies in the industry is called Beckley Psytech, is doing a lot of interesting work with a compound called 5-MeO-DMT, is what some people refer to as the toad, which Mike Tyson may have made very popular. And they're doing a lot of interesting work around depression, and they're based in the UK and starting their clinical trials over there. I think the key is, when you look at it as an investor, is can they actually transfer that data and those trials into the FDA so that you can move quicker, and that's still has some improvement.
I would say that there's probably equally as much research going on and around the globe as there is in the United States now. A substantial amount of work going on in Israel. We just shipped our first batch of NN-DMT and 5-MeO to the Hadassah Hebrew University just a few weeks ago for an animal research study. The university clearly is not a drug manufacturer, so they're looking for a source or supply, and I think that goes for most researchers, but in general, it's pretty spread out currently. I would say maybe the U.S. by population size. In general, it's all over the globe.
In terms of the business model, you've got to have the supervision. From a services side, any thoughts on where the industry is going to go over the next 5 to 10 years in terms of delivering on that issue?
It's an essential component with these kind of first batch of psychedelic approvals, potential approvals, because you need, again, in order to make it safe, 2 therapists in the room, and so you got to train a lot of therapists. So there's businesses out there just dedicated to training therapists right now for the potential approval, so you can take people through their journeys. There's a lot of I think risk from an investment point of view of like, how is that really gonna work? And are you going to have enough therapists that are qualified and that don't, get into trouble, which, with any type of psychotherapy, sometimes things happen, right? And you've seen a couple of issues come up, because you're dealing with, other humans.
The topic of therapy, I mean, clearly these are, psychedelic drugs. Many of us in this room have probably used them. Some of us have probably done them under the guidance of a therapist. But in general, the adding that therapeutic component to the experience has been proven to have a great deal of additional efficacy beyond just taking the drug at home or in a party scene, a festival or concert. But in general, it's also one of the more expensive parts of the treatment. So one of the things that a lot of drug researchers or manufacturers are looking at is, actually ways to reduce the amount of time that a patient or individual would be under it's called the psychedelic experience. So there are some, I'd say, novel drug research that's being done today, and there are some more traditional compounds that are being researched just due to the shorter duration of the intoxication.
That's why I like, 5-MeO-DMT, journey can take 20 minutes, right? And you can be, theoretically out of your therapist's office in an hour. Some of these other ones that are going to be the first ones approved, you're in there for, 6 hours or more. So yeah, the duration is a big issue.
Can you talk a little bit more about, there's some approaches that believe that the trip is necessary and some approaches where it's a sort of tripless experience. Can you walk through kind of the scientific underpinnings of either approach and why one might be successful over another?
Yeah, I mean, I touched on it before. Basically, I think the argument, and right now there's been some preclinical work that's been done on animals, and the results look promising. Of course, animals don't always translate to humans. But the idea is that because of the neuroplasticity that happens when you take a psychedelic, your brain rewires in a way where you're kind of get better, basically, without actually going on a journey or seeing your past or going through your trauma. But a lot of the people who have been around the industry, taking psychedelics for a long time or being practitioners, believe that that's how you heal. You have to go see, what you went through and go through that experience and relive that from a different perspective, a big picture perspective, you may. And that's the way to approach healing trauma. So it's a fascinating. I think it's probably gonna be the main thing in 2023 for the industry is, does it actually work? To do it without the trip.
The military is struggling with veterans returning with PTSD. Can you talk about some of the unique challenges associated with the military population or the military's initial thoughts on integrating psychedelics into a post-recovery?
Yeah, they've been a driver in this movement actually, because of what I mentioned, 30 suicides a day or around that number. Obviously, that's a disaster for the U.S. government if that continues, and not to mention the ones that just end up on the street and it's just not. It's not good for America. It's not good for anyone, right? So that's been one of the things putting pressure on the government to actually change things, and they've been driving a lot of the fast tracking and potential legislation. So yeah,
I think that clearly the current status of scheduling for most of these compounds is an impediment for getting access to military veterans. Even we saw the Texas legislature, I believe it was last year, that actually introduced a bill that compels the state to do research on PTSD war victims and their wives that have suffered as part of the condition or challenges, but there's still no real access. So what you're seeing in Texas, as an example, is there are these churches or groups that are using these religious exemptions to administer the compounds, and it's certainly not done probably at the same rigor that a clinical trial, certainly not a clinical trial would be done, but certainly even not the same rigor that perhaps Oregon or Colorado is contemplating now. So what we need to see is these compounds to move from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 at least to really open up that access.
In terms of the next year, who are some companies that are working on near-term inflection point milestones, clinical studies that'll complete, that you're really interested and excited about seeing?
Well, look, we are investing mostly at an earlier stage, right? I mean, obviously there's big milestones coming from MAPS for MDMA and Compass for psilocybin, but we're excited to see what happens with these companies that are preclinical on analogs, which promise to deliver efficacy while stripping out the psychedelic effect. There's a company called Delix Therapeutics, which has a pretty renowned scientist out of UC Davis called David Olson, who's doing really interesting work there. There's another company called Tehran Biosciences, and Tehran is one of the only companies in the space that's actually struck a deal with big pharma. They've done a deal with Sanofi, and again, they're also in that space where they're trying to mask the psychedelic effects so you can have neuroplasticity but without the trip. And that's going to be interesting to see if it actually moves forward.
Chris, thoughts from you?
I would agree with Enrique. Companies like Delix are doing some real research. There's also, I might add, there's probably 300 or 400 companies in the space, and it's hard to sometimes wade through what's real and what's not. So you certainly have to do a lot of homework. Even some of the more, I'd say, public-facing companies now, I sometimes question not just the way that they're investing their resources, but if the path or the work that they're pursuing is even doable, or if it's even being pursued. It's a bit confusing.
Great. Well, I want to leave enough time for questions. So any last closing comments? Otherwise, I'll open it up to questions.
No, the reason we came together to form this vehicle called Ocama Partners was to help the world heal. But I think there is an opportunity to really make strong returns here. Obviously, you got to focus on companies that can weather the storm because you're gonna need a long runway. It was mentioned before, how much clinical trials cost in the hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes more. So we're going to try to support those companies forward so that they can bring treatments that we think are important to people.
Great. Let's open it up to questions. Anybody have any questions for the panelists?
You're absolutely right. Regulation ultimately just builds upon the existing black market. There's really no barrier of entry or challenge for someone to cultivate their own mushrooms. It's one of the reasons why our company has chosen to study the mushrooms, but we're certainly not investing a substantial amount in the natural product side. The pharmaceutical industry in general is more inclined or very much inclined to products that are synthesized. So there's an opportunity there, but mushrooms is a great example. If you don't have to go very far to find them, whether it's in the raw form, growing in the field, in a chocolate bar, they're everywhere. And there lies the question of do those mushrooms belong in the kind of the pharma or medical domain, or is it more of free choice, adult use? And I have opinions on that, but certainly not an answer.
I agree with you. It's a great question and an important conundrum. I don't have the answer. I think I just want to keep it off the hands of people that either are children, because before the brain forms, it's not a good thing. And then there's also contraindicated for people with certain family histories of schizophrenia and other illnesses. So how do you do that without regulating? I think there's also there's a line between going and opening stores like we have for cannabis for psychedelics, and also just letting people grow it or find a way to use them. Once you start opening stores and stuff like that, it starts becoming marketable and more in people's faces. So maybe that's where you draw the line.
Great. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you for the time today. Appreciate it.